Hello, bonjour, ahoy, and welcome to a special podcast recording from the 2025 GLOBSEC Forum. I'm Roger Hilton, coming to you from Prague. In a world marked by mounting geopolitical instability, from the battlefields of Ukraine to rising tensions in the Indo-Pacific to evolving intersection of trade and defense cooperation among allies, the contours of global security are rapidly evolving. Here to help us navigate the newly forming shapes is Dr. Evelyn Farkas, the Executive Director of the McCain Institute. For those who don't know, Dr. Farkas has 3 decades of experience working on national security and foreign policy in the U.S. executive, legislative branch, private sector, and for international organizations overseas. She served from 2012 to 2015 as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia, Balkans, Caucasus, Conventional Arms Control. And from 2010 to 2012, she was Senior Advisor to the Supreme Allied Commander Europe and Special Advisor to the Secretary of Defense for the NATO Summit. Dr. Farkas, I hope I got it all in.
No,
it's quite a resume. Before we get into the hot and heavy stuff, Dr. Farkas, it's your first GLOBSEC experience. How's it been? What's your takeaway?
Fantastic. First of all, I have long been impressed with your political leadership, especially President Pavel, what he has done to help Ukraine and to really rally people behind the military effort is fantastic. Running into lots of colleagues and, fellow national security geeks has been wonderful. It's a fantastic opportunity.
So you would recommend it, I guess? I
would highly recommend it,
All
yes.
right, on TripAdvisor. Let's get into these shaping contours. We can start with an opening question. As the world burns, as they say. Dr. Farkas, in this current moment of geopolitical instability from Ukraine to the Middle East and Asia, what do you see as the defining feature of today's global security landscape?
Well, 2 things. One, we have this group of autocrats. We have adversary nations, Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, working together to challenge the international order, to challenge democracy and democracies. Of course, all of this is, focuses or culminates in the effort in Ukraine, but it's not the only thing. All around the world, they're working together. And at the same time, while they're challenging the international order, there is a lack of leadership on our side of the equation, if you will. So we have many democratic leaders, and I mentioned, of course, President Pavel being one of them, but we don't have any one inspiring leader leading all of us unless you consider President Zelensky that leader.
So as you said, democracies versus authorities, what's old is new again to a certain degree. A bit of a tricky question that I think a lot of us didn't see coming, but maybe you can speak on. Based on your professional experience in the Pentagon, does the current international trade wars impact defense cooperation among allies, mill to mill?
Yes, because of course you're doing trade. And if you're putting tariffs on European items, and there's even the issue of components, if you bring in components into a U.S. Aircraft, for example, and we do have contracts with foreign governments where we actually are required as something called an offset, sometimes to use technology from other countries. It makes everything more expensive. So it ultimately undermines our own national security because we're making the cost go up in literally in dollars and cents. On
the actual mill to mill, is this something that they might be talking about? Or as you said, it's really taken on the sidelines on another level?
Well, it seems to me the discussions about tariffs are separate, although there is a national security element we've seen now with the most recent China discussions. Mm-hmm. They really came down to export controls and national security issues, access to rare earth minerals and the like. So there's something of a mixing, but I haven't seen defense industry weigh in publicly with our president, and I haven't seen that be discussed sort of internationally or in the media yet. Hopefully they will treat it separately and give some tariff waivers there if they're going to continue with this high rate of tariffs.
Well, we'll have to have you back on. It's a bit of an evolving subject. Yeah. We're sitting here in the heart of Europe. It's beautiful outside, but unfortunately there is a war going on not so far away. With Western aid slowing and Ukraine facing manpower and munition shortages, is the Kremlin's bet on outlasting Western resolve starting to pay off, actually? Putin's long game?
No, because I think that, first of all, we have to remember that Russia is weak. They have 21 or 20, over 20% inflation. They have, yes, that's right. And the interest rate is 10%.
Potato inflation.
Yes. And the interest rate is 10%. They're afraid of moving the interest rate further because it will increase inflation. The dynamics for the Russian economy are very bad. The way that they get revenue into their system is by selling primarily their oil to two main customers. 70% of the oil they sell is purchased by China and India. The United States may very well levy sanctions on Putin. Even if we don't, again, I don't think time is on his side economically. Militarily also, we've seen what the Ukrainians can do at low cost to the Russian military. So there are many factors that are actually not weighing on Putin's side. And finally, President Trump does not have infinite patience. In fact, he's not a patient man. And so we will see whether the United States will weigh in on the side of Ukraine more heavily.
Speaking to Ukrainians specifically, at the last meeting, you had the Russian negotiator who sort of referenced the Great Northern War, which took place from 1700 to 721, Russia overtaking Sweden, where their chief negotiator said, "We will go forever." On this, what is your takeaway when you hear the chief negotiator telling Ukrainians that we will go on this forever?
The Ukrainian answer is we will go on to the last man, woman, and child, because for them it's existential. Mm-hmm. The other thing is they really shouldn't bring up Finland. Finland has decided it's much more dangerous to be neutral than to be in a collective, operational, effective national security alliance, which is NATO. And frankly, I was in Austria about 10 days ago, and the Austrians there were talking about whether neutrality makes sense for them.
That is a hot take. Austrian neutrality since 1955. Yeah. Obviously, the contours
That's actually a scoop. No one's talking about it. Anyway.
We'll have that one on Switzerland too. We've talked about Europe and how everything is interconnected, right? Across the board. Dr. Farkas, if Russia were to prevail in Ukraine, which, as you've indicated already, is not your position or you don't think it's feasible, how might that embolden China's calculus regarding Taiwan and its broader regional ambitions? Right.
These two things are connected. The Chinese are watching. They have actually, from 2014, when I was in the Pentagon, they actually solicited a meeting with me and the Assistant Secretary of State at the time to find out what's going on with Crimea. So the Chinese, and by the way, the Chinese don't recognize the seizure of Crimea. The Chinese have been watching to see what Russia can get away with, because it will indicate what can they get away with Taiwan. I'm sure they looked at the recent attacks that the Ukrainians conducted with alarm, because the Taiwanese are also building up their drone capability. I was in Taiwan twice in the last 12 months, in February more recently. We know the Taiwanese understand that their allies in this are the Ukrainians. If Ukraine can prevail, she will have to think twice.
So from your perspective in Taipei, the longer this goes on, as bloody and costly as it is, that's a sign to them in Beijing that maybe they have to think twice before sort of an amphibious invasion.
Yes. And Xi also has additional complications. He's been purging his military. He clearly doesn't trust his military commanders. That seems to go deeper and farther than perhaps in Russia, although I'm sure Vladimir Putin has his doubts about some of his generals as well.
As you said, you mentioned in your intro the changing dynamic about authoritarians working together. The New York Times had a great report recently about how the FSB have been, very worried about outsized Chinese influence coming into Russia. What do you make of this, perceived massive strategic coordination between Russia and China? And is it really such a direct threat to the international order, or is it really by piecemeal, a la carte, how it goes on in the future?
I think it is a direct threat to us right now, because Russia and China are working hand in glove. China loves that Russia is weakening us, distracting us. And maybe China loves, frankly, that we're also weakening Russia's military power. The Russians are correct to be worried about Chinese intent. They always were, actually, historically. So deep down, they know what their national security interests are and where they are not connected with China's. But they have no choice at this point. Vladimir Putin needs China. He needs the dual-use military equipment that he's getting from China and the money.
Yeah, the report finally said that despite the threats coming from Chinese influence, they still needed the support, right?
Yeah, so they have no choice.
Exactly. Dr. Farkas, we're running out of time. We're going to go back to a familiar haunting of yours. As you know, at the end of the month, the NATO Hague Summit will be coming up. Don't mean to put you on the spot. A lot of cameras will be there. What do you consider success for the upcoming NATO Summit?
Well, first of all, unity in that everyone is there and that there's no disagreement that's public and makes NATO look politically weak, because again, our adversaries are watching. Certainly any kind of continued statement supporting Ukraine, a continued statement that more military assistance will be coming from NATO members and NATO collectively. That's important. And beyond that, I think that Europe needs to convey a sense of urgency about the Russia threat to them directly, not just to Ukraine.
All right. Well, again, we'll have to sort of do a deep dive afterwards to see how we worked. And the last one is you're working Arizona State for the McCain Foundation Institute, excuse me. A titan of international affairs and most basically doing the right thing, right? Everybody will remember, when he was campaigning with President Obama. In this moment of democratic backsliding and global tension, what do you believe Senator McCain would be doing if he was alive today?
Well, he would be shouting to the heavens from the well of the United States Senate. He would be doing actually what the McCain Institute just did about a week ago, or a little over a week ago. We took a delegation of senior congressional staff members, mostly Republicans, only one Democrat, and showed them what is happening literally in Ukraine. We took them to Bucha, we took them to Kharkiv, we took them to Dnipro, and of course Kyiv. And they learned a lot. And as a result, we've actually seen an impact on the votes that they're set to take on sanctions legislation, for example. So Senator McCain would be conducting those congressional trips. He would be speaking out, and he would be a leader. He would be leading all of us and reminding us of our national interest and our values. I
think safe to say he would be with his buddy Lindsey Graham on the 500% secondary sanctions.
Absolutely, and pushing him to do more, and probably pushing Senator Graham to push the president more.
Well, Dr. Farkas, on that note, thank you so much for coming to Prague, for working with GLOBSEC. We look forward to further collaboration, and all the best with your work at the McCain Institute.
Thank you very much, Roger.